In 1959, Jack Kirby and Wally Wood collaborated on a newspaper strip, and if it had been successful, we may have never gotten the Marvel Universe. Thanks for joining me. My name is Daryl, and I am the host of Read Your Comics. And today I am looking at a piece of comic history. Now, this was not published as a comic book at the time. This was a daily newspaper strip, and this book is only collecting the Sunday edition. It is worth noting, though, that the Sunday strips of this were running its own stories week to week versus the daily strip. So I also have some of these comic review magazines from the 80s that were reprinting some of these. This is one of the Sunday strips, and you can get a good look at how the colors were being reproduced up until this book came out. So this whole magazine is not just Sky Masters, it's like a week's worth of Sky Masters. So this was the daily strip by Kirby. This one was actually inked by Dick Ayers. He had a few different inkers. Wally Wood, of course, helping on the Sunday pages. It's about astronauts living and working in space. It was very much the science future of the 1950s and the space race. A newspaper syndicate was looking for a new adventure strip to run in their newspaper. And in this day and time, those newspaper strips were much more lucrative for a cartoonist than the comic books were. Kirby was always kind of looking for a nice gig like that to help support his family and also have some ownership over the property. The syndicate came to the offices of DC, and an editor there actually suggested Kirby. Kirby gave a pitch of some other stuff he had been working on at the time that was kind of similar, reworked it into this, and they decided to run with it. Then it got into a big legal mess with that editor who was also claiming some ownership because he arranged the meetings with the syndicate, and it fell into just a legal mess. Kirby ended up losing that battle, and that would eventually lead him to going to the Marvel offices, partnering up with Stan Lee, and creating the Marvel Universe. So that's why I say, had this strip been a major success, we may have never gotten the Marvel Universe. But if you're like me and you're just like a comics history nerd, you love Jack Kirby, you love Wally Wood, you've got to get this book. And guess what? I'm giving away a copy. Through the month of December in 2025, I'm running a giveaway at readyourcomics.com/giveaway. You can hit the QR code on the screen or follow the links in the description. Super easy to enter. And on top of it, I'm throwing in one of my t-shirts from my store. I've got a stretch goal that if I get a certain number of YouTube subscribers during the giveaway, I'm going to add more stuff to it. So go ahead and enter. It's an awesome book. It's oversized hardcover. Look how big this is compared to a standard comic. Even that magazine I was holding up. Look, it's a nice big hardcover that you get to see some Kirby inked by Wally Wood line art. You don't want to miss out on this. Go ahead and hit up that giveaway. If you're not sold, let's take a look at the inside. So this is actually a second edition. It says it right there. The first edition, I don't think it included the color guides in the back. I've not seen one personally, but I do know that it exists. And I don't know if it's this big either. You have the gorgeous inside cover papers here. It's the same on the back side of the book as well. Really kind of blowing up that pen and ink work. Now, this says image courtesy of John Byrne. John Byrne may own this original piece. That's interesting. Um, this was compiled by the Jack Kirby Museum to publish. I think it's their first book that they've actually published. It was part of a crowdfunding campaign in the summertime, and I got multiple copies specifically so I could give one away. It's really well done. A lot of backstory here. This tells you the whole backstory of the strip, how it came to be, which I gave the very abbreviated version, but this is a much more detailed version that they took out of the Jack Kirby Collector number 15. And it describes the whole process. Here's one of the pitch pages that Kirby did. This one was when the concept was actually called Space Busters. And man, it is gorgeous to look at in itself. This is a high quality reproduction in this book. Uh, you really see the details of this tank tread and stuff. This is a very Kirby pose in this panel. Got a little bit of a kind of a Flash Gordon look to it. the style of the rockets and so forth. What Sky Masters was more grounded in reality, though, in real science, and we'll get to that more in a moment as well. Here's some different names that they were playing with: Sky Cannon, Rocket Cannon, Sky Cannon again, before settling on Sky Masters. Now, it's not a description of a team, it is a person. His name is Sky Masters. Here's a beautiful space piece colored by Kirby, and just some great back matter in general, or front matter in this case. So Ferran Delgado is the person that actually did the recoloring here, and he somehow came across the original color guides and just started doing it kind of as a side project for himself to remaster some of the strips that he had available with the color guides. Eventually, he reached out, I think, to the Kirby estate, and they helped provide him with what they had, and he was able to reproduce or recolor these strips and restore them, really. He didn't try to like add something new to it. He just tried to bring to life what was already there. So here you see how it appeared on the printed page, and you've got this like aged yellow look. And in fact, if you look at the cover of this, very much matches that, right? This is Kirby's original color guide right here. And then this is what Delgado reproduced based off of his color guide. Some of these colors have probably changed a little bit over time with age. He came up with this color palette to match it, keeping the Ben-Day dots of the printed press of the time. Even though this is printed on, uh, a heavy, glossy paper, you can see it across this right here as well. And so, without further ado, here are the creme de la creme of Sky Masters of the Space Force, the exceptional collaboration by Jack Kirby and Wallace Wood at the peak of their careers. This distinctive artwork has never been reproduced in high quality or with such absolute fidelity to Kirby's original colors. This section is the result of decades long quests for material and many months of remastering. So each page was one Sunday strip, and the story continues from Sunday to Sunday. So on these first couple of pages, we meet Sky Masters and the Space Force here. Kind of funny we have a Space Force today, isn't it? I don't know what they do, but not this. They don't do this. I like how they have these like little air guns to shoot them around through the upper atmosphere, and they're receiving a guest. So you see their space station here that looks like a wheel, and this is a nice little touch to this book. They put in these notes about where Kirby got this inspiration from. This particular wheel came from an illustration in Collier's magazine with an article written by Dr. Werner von Braun. Pretty famous name there in rocket science. And he theorized like how people would live and work in space, and had an illustrator come up with this wheel. So that's what Kirby was using as inspiration for most of this stuff that you see, this equipment and technology that this Space Force is using. But you're still going to get a little Kirby-ness to it as this one guy comes up and he brings these, he calls them like stallions or something like that. They're more or less little space cycles that they can use to ride around out in the open space to get to things without just their little air guns there. And this looks like a very Kirby style machine right here. But most of the stuff you'll find is based out of like popular mechanics and things like that that Kirby was pulling for inspiration. By the third strip, we start getting this scrapbook, which is almost like little science facts that are pulled straight out of those magazines and illustrated into a more digestible format for your average reader, especially the readers of the comic strips. And pretty much every Sunday did that. I almost found those more interesting than the storyline going on up here itself. So in this one of these space cycles fails and gets hit by a little piece of space rock and starts careening down towards Earth, and he has to go save him. And then they're stranded out there, and they're able to use a ham radio and contact this girl on Earth who's able to signal back to the space station and get them rescued. You really see Kirby in this panel right here, I feel like. But even this panel, look at that machinery. Very realistic ham radio operation. Maybe there's more dials and stuff there than there normally would be, but when I think of Kirby machinery, I think of like, Fantastic Four, Doctor Doom's lab, Black Panther and Wakanda lab, and all the intricate knobs and squiggly pipes and all the stuff going around. But in this, he keeps it pretty realistic. And this panel is great right here. This is part of the scrapbook describing how they will use a telescope to see off into distant galaxies and stuff. And they don't describe like Hubble in this. I thought that was when I was reading this, I thought they were going to basically be talking about the beginnings of like the Hubble telescope, but they were just talking about a more powerful telescope from Earth. The next adventure leads into uh, a moon mission. And this is 1959. Remember that, the 10 years before we actually go to the moon. And then there's like some kind of espionage storyline here where there's an imposter. There's these twin brothers, and one of them's going and one of them's being left behind. So he drugs the one brother being left behind, drugs the other one so that he can take his place. And they find that there's an imposter on the ship. Here's this panel that I showed you from the cover of that magazine. So you can kind of see the two comparison. Restored from Kirby's color guides versus the printed version. Pretty neat stuff. I love this panel. You feel like the beginnings of the Fantastic Four are in this panel right here. When we start getting into these pages with the moon, this is where the Wally Wood I feel like really is coming out. The detail of these craters, that's Wally Wood adding his extra bit of flair to some of these. I like this panel a lot too. Look at the way that the lighting as he sticks his head up through this little hatch to look out, and the red lighting from the instrument and control panels and stuff versus the shadow. It's so well done. Look at all this instrumentation up around them and stuff up there too. There they are peeking their head out of that little bubble. And as the strip goes on, I feel like Wally Wood's putting a heavier hand on some of the inking. And it could be, Kirby was doing this and he was still doing comic book work at the time. It's not like this was the only thing he was doing. He was working for DC. So it may be his pencils were getting a little looser and Wood was having to do a little bit more work. But you definitely see in all the black laid down right there. Then we get to the moon and just some beautiful exploration panels here. I can imagine that a kid in 1959 at the peak of the space race just being totally enthralled by this. And in fairness, the strip was fairly successful. I said earlier that had this been a success, we may never have gotten the Marvel Universe. Really, it was successful. And that was part of the problem that led to the legal battle that ended up eventually killing the strip. So, had it not been for the legal battle, this probably would have been successful and we may never have gotten the Marvel Universe. Who knows? Here's your cover image right here. So this only lasted 2 years, so you're only getting about 100 of these pages, although the book is fairly thick for only 100 pages. That's because as we go along, we're going to get more back matter. So let's go ahead and skip to some of that because I'm not going over the whole storyline here. Feels a little looser, more Kirby like. This feels almost more Dick Ayers. Yeah, now we're getting some Dick Ayers ink because this may be from that same uh, one I was showing over there. This definitely doesn't look like Wally Wood. So I guess not the whole thing isn't by Wally Wood, but those first several are. So let's jump to the back matter. So there's these throwaway panels too. In some instances, I guess they just decided this panel doesn't work for whatever reason and they would replace it. And he would actually cut them out. But he kept them because they are available to see. And there's a bunch of them. In fact, there's another section here in a moment Yeah, here's the more on the throwaway panels. I haven't read this article yet, and I think it just talks about the inspiration from this Collier's magazine. Huh, I wonder if that's the issue right here. It says the prestigious Collier's magazine introduced the first spacesuit in February 1953 issue. It was the first of a series of three specials focused on man's survival in space. I wonder if those are easy to get a hold of. So here's a whole section of the throwaway panels, really breaking it down. So you are getting the full experience of this comic strip that Kirby did. Now, this is the added part to this second edition, presenting rare samples of confirmed Kirby color, some hand painted on high quality stats that preserve the integrity of Wallace Wood's delicate embellishments, free from the distortion of poor newspaper printing. Additionally, some of Kirby's rougher crayon colored guides are also featured. So you kind of get the same strips again, and it's interesting how they're laid out horizontally like that. Here's one I was just talking about with the ham radios. And you can tell they're a little rougher, the color guides are, compared to the finished strip. I'm sure this was done fairly quick. And you can really see the detail, the brush strokes that Kirby was laying down. We'll see the cover image in a moment. I mean, look at this beautiful moon shot right there. There's our cover image. I love these two with the different colors for the spacesuits for the characters. It was a good choice to differentiate them. When they're in these suits and they all look the same, they also have their names plastered across their heads like that. But giving them a different color, that goes way back. Think like even more modern times, the Ninja Turtles. Let's give them different color masks so we can tell them apart. The Power Rangers or Voltron, any of that stuff. There's always like a color coding to help the audience differentiate characters that have a similar look to them. Really see the values and gradients in this one. But I find this stuff really interesting. This is like more of a process piece. And I mean, if you wanted to read the strips back here, you could. You're just not all of them are here. Some days have gone missing over time. And you definitely see how some of them get fairly rough. Here they are translated to each other. These are the printer's proofs. Here's your crayon colored ones. That's kind of funny. Much more simplistic um, approach there. Just thinking of Kirby coloring with crayon. See how aged they're looking. This is almost like an artist edition. So here's some original art. Inked straight over it. Here's that panel again. See the wide out spots. I always find it interesting on this old original art how bright the whiteout is still to this day versus the yellowing of the paper over time. But that whiteout stands pat. Man, this is really nice to look at. I like the colored version with the color guides and stuff, but looking at the black and white detail of some of these panels and those Wallace Wood inks over Kirby are just incredible. Now, some people don't really like Wally Wood ink on Kirby because they feel like Wally Wood puts too much of himself on top of Kirby's pencils. Um, I get that. You know, I love Mike Royer does a more pure does a more pure Kirby pencil to ink approach, and I love that stuff. Of course, Joe Sinnott. Um, but you got to appreciate the collaboration of two just masters of cartooning in Wood and Kirby and working together on something like this. And this fits Wally Wood too. You know, Wally Wood He did do some superhero stuff, but Wood's work was definitely more in the realistic realm, and that's where he excelled. And this was perfect for that. So you can spend a lot of time just staring at these pages. I'm just going to kind of get on through it because I want you to get a copy of this. I want you to win the copy that I have in the giveaway. Look at it, enjoy it for yourself. This is an interesting quote from Dick Ayers. Kirby is sending me some originals that are inked by Wally Wood because he wants me to imitate his inking style. That will be a real tough assignment because Wally is just about the best inker in the biz. I can't imagine Dick Ayers trying to imitate Wally Wood. Really, anybody. So these are some other news strips that Kirby worked on that, just didn't have the success that he was looking for. This is from Race for the Moon, which I actually have a copy of that. That's a public domain book that you can get publications of out there. And that's pretty much the book. Kirby Wood collaborations. They did a Challengers of the Unknown together. So, they worked together on several different things. This is a beautiful page. I was looking at it the other day. So from space to undersea, some original pencil pages. Kind of rough layouts, really. And that's it. Same back paper here. That's all I got for it today. Be sure to enter that contest so you can win a copy of this and a t-shirt. And like I said, I've got stretch goals. If we hit a certain number of subscribers before the end of December, I'm going to throw more stuff into the giveaway. Once again, I'll throw that QR code up on screen, or you can hit the link in the description. Until next time,
Read your comments.